Good morning, everybody. Here we are for section 2, the environment and society. Your essential question: what are the primary differences between developed and developing countries? Something to think about while we go through our notes today. Once again, have the PowerPoint open on one side of the screen, the video on the other, or have the video on your phone and the PowerPoint open on your computer, whichever way works for you, but it will definitely go much easier if you do. I'll try and throw some of the images up here behind me, but otherwise, here we go. Your first key term is going to be supply and demand. So supply and demand goes up on the left-hand column, and we'll do some bullet notes out to the right. Remember the color coding. The purple are going to be your key terms. If it is in red or blue, you do not have to write those necessarily, because I'm presuming it's either, in this case, the very first one is our vocabulary word, the law of supply and demand, and you've already done that on vocabulary. But otherwise, if it's blue during the course of the notes, I either presume that that's something that's understood, it's redundant, we've actually already covered it somewhere else, and or you just know it. But if it's in blue and you're not sure and it's something unfamiliar to you, you may want to write it down. So first off the bat, we talk about the environment and society. Well, society uses natural resources, whatever those things are. And although it's a policy in economics, it's part of social sciences. It states that the demand of a good or a service increases, the value of the food or the service also increases. Let's look at it another way. If the amount of coffee in the world is abundant, there's a lot of it, there's a large supply. So the cost of that good tends to be low. If there's a lot of it, it's not as expensive. However, if there's not much of it, then the demand, the price of it goes up. Because everybody out there wanting their coffee in the morning, oh yeah, that's nice. They're still going to want coffee, but if there's not as much of it, they're going to charge more. The law of supply and demand. If there is more demand for a good, if the demand increases, so does the service for it. Law of supply and demand. It gives the example also as a copper production. So up here you can see the world copper production. In purple is the actual available copper. So you can see there around, the late 1990s, the supply of copper was really high, so the cost of copper was pretty low. The cost of copper per pound or per kilogram was fairly low. But then somewhere around the year 2005, or I guess, around 2003, the supply of copper started to go down. Copper mines closed. They ran out of copper in those areas before discovering other areas of it. And then the price of copper went up. There wasn't as much, so people that still had some could charge more. The law of supply and demand. This goes along with any kind of good or service. And as long as we humans are using natural resources, there's law of supply and demand is going to be in effect. This is something in the world of environmental science we can use to our favor if need be. That takes us to cost and benefits. And a lot of this is economic principles, but it ties in very heavily with environmental science, because as we decide things are good for the environment, well, it might raise the cost of a good. We in America decided a long time back that the pollution that we were seeing in the world wasn't really what we wanted. So we put technology to work in the smokestacks in the factories, but that raised the price of the goods. And we said, well, we needed that. Other countries, China and India, for instance, did not put some of these same ecological standards on what they were producing, and now the pollution levels in their country, they're paying for it and they're having to go back in hindsight. So we're going to look at some of these costs and benefits. The cost of an environmental solution can be very high. We say, hey, you're polluting the environment. You need to stop. Well, in order for a company to not make a pollution, they may have to charge so much for their goods, we wouldn't buy them, and they go out of business. So they say the cost is too high. But a local community says it's not too high because we're going to get sick and die if you don't do these things. In the world of environmental science, we always have to do a cost and benefit analysis. Yes, it might be better for the world if none of us drove around in cars, but if it would crash the economy and we would all go bankrupt and poor and couldn't afford things, we're not going to do it. So we've got to make choices. We've got to look at that cost-benefit analysis. Is it actually worth it in the long run? And these cost benefits tend to cause things to get more expensive. Once again, it depends on who is doing the cost-benefit analysis. If I am deciding what you should do, I might think it's perfectly fine for you to walk to school every day instead of taking a car or a bus. You, however, say that I can't. It'd take me an hour to walk to school and an hour to get home, and I can't get everything done, and et cetera, et cetera. So we have to consider putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes many times, but it's not unusual for us to not do that. Which brings us to a term of countries. We can talk about an individual doing this or doing that. Well, a lot of times in environmental science, we're looking at countries, what countries do. And in a sense, we break things down into developed and developing countries. Now, sometimes they are very cut and dry. A country like the United States compared to a country like Nepal. Nepal is somewhere I lived, so you'll hear me pick on it from time to time. I have experience there. I could name others. I could talk about possibly Afghanistan or Ghana or Ethiopia. But the difference between America and Nepal, America is developed. Overall, individually, we have higher incomes. Our average income in America is a lot higher than the average income of somebody in Nepal. We have slower population growth. Our population growth is a very slow, steady growth. Most couples tend to have around 2 children each. We have a little bit more on average, about 2 point something. So we replace our population plus a little bit. But in areas like Nepal, the population growth has been really steep. People have more like 4 to 5 children each. So the population grows very rapidly. We have in America, a developed country, diverse industrial economies. We're producing steel, we have copper mines, we're producing electronics, we make furniture. There are all kinds, biotechnology companies, research companies, you name it, you can find a job doing all kinds of industry here in the United States of America, where most developing countries are still largely agricultural based. Individual families are still growing their own food. They have their own set of farms, they're doing stuff for themselves. Very little in the way of technology or people going into factories for work. They're developing, not fully developed. Where we are science and technology heavy, developing countries tend to not be. We also tend to have a lot stronger social supports. There are counselors at the school. We have 5 of them at Buchholz to help with the population. There are oftentimes psychologists, sociologists. The government provides social help, different needs, unemployment, all kinds of things to try and help provide for our mental and just physical stability in the developed world. In the developing, they're still pretty much relying on family. If you're on hard times, family's having to take care of you. You need somebody to talk to, you go talk to grandma, etc. There just isn't as much social support. It's still largely family agricultural based. So developing countries tend to have higher income, slower population growth, diverse industrial economies, and a lot of strong social support. Developed tend to have lower average income. They tend to have simple agricultural-based communities, and they also tend to have very rapid population growth. So almost all of our environmental problems really come down to this idea of your next key term: population and consumption. The number of people versus the raw materials, the raw goods that we have, and our consumption of them. And when it comes down to this, we really take these root problems down to two main causes. If the population is growing too quickly for the environment to support, we get environmental problems because kind of number two. The goods are getting used up faster than they can be replaced. So if population is growing too rapidly, then we are using up, wasting, or polluting the natural resources faster than they can be renewed. So it comes down to population, natural resources. If the population is stable and we're using natural resources at a pace that the resources can replenish themselves, things stay pretty good. When the population increases too much, or the population starts using natural resources faster than they can be replaced, or they're producing waste faster than it can be taken care of, or the environment can absorb or clean up, then we get problems. When we talk about environmental science, this is what it's going to hinge on. Remember, the main difference in environmental science and ecology: human impact. So we're largely looking at human impact on an environment here. So we're going to look at some local population pressures. So let's take somewhere that is severely overpopulated. So when you get an overpopulated region, when I lived in Nepal, areas in Nepal were largely overpopulated. Too many people in one small area. The India-Nepal area, to try and put it in perspective, America is about 375 million. I'm sure when the next census comes out, it might be bumping 400 million people. India, Nepal, that area has over 1 billion people in 1/3 the land mass. So the United States is this big with 400 million people. India is this big with 1 billion people. That's more than tripling our population in the United States. You would have to be 9 times our population because they're triple our population but in 1/3 of the area. So when the population gets really heavy, very dense, it can make difficulties or problems. When it gets overpopulated, then we're trying to take too much of the natural resources. We're using water up quicker than it's being replaced just by the normal water cycle. We're taking trees down faster than they can regrow. So the forest gets stripped bare. Desertification comes in. Since we've taken all the vegetation, the topsoil washes away, it gets exhausted, we can't grow plants as much. Animals can't survive. We've taken away their habitat. They get driven to extinction. So along with this, we tend to see things like malnutrition, starvation, and disease. As we've learned here, when you're in a densely populated area, disease can spread more rapidly. The denser the population, the quicker a disease can travel. And these wind up being constant threats in areas where we have this severe overpopulation. It doesn't matter if it's in developed or developing, the problems are still the same. But unfortunately, we tend to see more of these problems in the developing. Because within the developing world, millions of people are starving every day. We worked in Nepal, India, Bangladesh, starvation was a very real thing that we saw on a daily basis. This is what my family and I worked to try and overcome in some of these areas. However, these areas where we're seeing some of the worst problems are also where the populations tend to grow the fastest. So, food production, education, and job creation can't keep pace with the population growth. So each person winds up getting fewer resources as the time goes by. Some of our work in Nepal, we would work with villages to help their economies to develop and get stronger so that they could petition for the government to provide a school in their village. There were many villages that had no public schools in them. The only people that were able to read and write or learn had to learn from their parents or people that could. There was no actual schools because we couldn't keep pace with everything that was moving and going on. Kind of the picture I've had up here. This is in Lucknow, India. Now, that's just a random Tuesday. This is not a festival, not a special event. That's just a normal day on a normal street with people out getting their goods, going shopping, just doing what you do. Very, very densely packed with people. And that's going to take us to consumption trends. So when we look at these local population pressures, we also have to track and take a look at consumption trends. Consumption, buying, eating, consuming of something. Now, for you and I here in America, to support our higher quality of life, where I have a one house just for my nuclear family, I have a car, my wife has a car, my daughter has a car, I have multiple shirts and shoes, etc. Well, this lifestyle, I am using more resources than my friends that live in Nepal. Me, I have more shoes than I probably am comfortable saying, but I have 2 different dress pair of shoes for coming to work. I've got a couple of different running shoes. I've got biking shoes. I've got flip-flops for around the house. I've got bedroom slippers for inside the house, etc., etc. You can probably run through the same thing. I have a lot of short sleeve shirts. I have some long sleeve shirts, It goes on and on. My friends in Nepal, they tended to have 2 outfits. You wore one day, you washed it that night, you wore the other one. They would have maybe 2 pair of shoes total, flip-flops, and maybe a nice or work pair of shoes. And this was for like your middle class. Developed nations like the United States, China, Germany, Spain, New Zealand, Australia, etc., we use about 75% of the world's resources. But here's the catch. We only make up about 20% of the world's population. 75% of the resources are going to support my and your lifestyle, but we only make up 20% of the population. That means 80% of the population is using 25%. We've got a mismatch here. And that creates an environmental problem, or a big one if we don't do something about it. This rate of consumption, it creates more waste. You and I in America create more waste per person on average than the same person living in Nepal, India, or Ghana. They don't produce as much waste because they're not consuming as much. In the United States and most of the developing world, our trash cans, like these back here, eat better than many parts of the world. And that's something we need to stop. We can eat our leftovers instead of throwing it out. Now, some of it comes down to policies in grocery stores. You turn something back that was a food and they have to throw it out, or it gets a little bit of a brown spot. Now, if it's me and I go pick the tomato from my vegetable garden and it's got a brown spot on it, just cut the brown spot out and eat the rest of it. But the grocery store, we have our laws and regulations because the brown spot, they have to throw the whole thing out. These are things we need to work to try and curb and find new solutions, because that's something we've got to find a way to put an end to. Which brings us to this point of ecological footprints. So, in the world, of environmental science, we try and look at and find ways where we can quantify what we're doing. Who's using what, how much is left, what can we do? And we use this term ecological footprint. Now that's your key term on the left, and it's also a vocab word. But then you've got a couple of other bullet points for it. These show the productive area of Earth needed to support one person in a particular country. So we take everybody in the country and it's an average. You may be better than the average, you may be worse than the average. This is what we're talking about. So how much area is needed for you to get the water you need, for you to get the food that you need, and everything? So if you eat fish, well, that fish had to grow somewhere, whether it was in a farm or out in the ocean. You ate blueberries, well, the blueberries had to grow somewhere. You had some pineapple, you had corn, you had beef, you had chicken. Well, that cow had to be grown, right? Had to live on a farm, it needed space. We try and say, how much space does it take to support your lifestyle? The amount of water you use, paper, trees, trash, you name it. So it's estimating the amount of land used for the crops, the grazing, forest, housing, everything that we do. So let's take a look at that. Now, on the next slide, and I've kind of got it up here, just a few of them, is an ecological footprint expressed in consumption. Now, these are in acres. An acre is a unit of land, typically in agriculture, what we talk about. Now, you and I don't go out there saying, ooh, yeah, wow, look at that acre of land. We're not really a farming society anymore. So let me put it in a number you can probably grasp or think about, a football field. Most of us have gone to a football game, seen one on TV or a soccer pitch, etc. Professional soccer pitches tend to be a little larger, but a football field, end zone to end zone, is 1.32 acres. It was a little bigger than an acre. You look at a football field, especially you cut out the end zones, and yeah, that's about what an acre is. Well, in the United States, note that nice high spike there. We're at 30 acres. That's 30 acres of land per person. So for my lifestyle to support, I had to buy my house, all the supplies for my house, the car that I drive, the food that I am eating, the fish that I get, the water that I use on a daily basis, takes 30 acres of land to support me. 30 acres of land to support my wife, 30 acres of land to support you. Well, look at India, about 2.5 acres of land. They're not using as much as we are. Mexico, around 7. Britain, England, is right around 16. So in England, they are using much less land per person for their goods than you and I are. So when it comes to me buying my coffee, the packaging that it comes in, I order something from Amazon, it comes in packaging and a layer of packaging, a layer of packaging, which all becomes waste. Well, that's a lot of acreage for land that I probably didn't need. If I could have gone to the store and just got coffee in my container instead of having to use packaging, it cuts down on it. And that's largely what's happening in places like India. They're not doing as much packaging, they're just buying their stuff at the local stores. So in the US, we have a high amount, a big footprint. We use a lot of land per. So once again, 30 acres of land for you and me, that's like 22.7 football fields. So to support my lifestyle, if I am an average American, it takes 22 football fields to provide the food and all the goods, etc., that I need on a yearly basis. It takes 22 acres or 22 football fields to support me, to give me all the food, everything that I'm accustomed to having. These are things we need to do, find some way to bring lower, because in places like India, they really may not be using enough. They need to probably come up and we need to come down. But our ecological footprints. Another one to look at up here is be hard to see on the screen, but better on the PowerPoint, is how many countries would be required. Now this isn't really an ecological footprint, but it's a nice way to look at it. So South Korea is just on the top of this board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like 8.25. The people in Korea need 8.25 Koreas to support their lifestyle. So obviously, they're not growing all their own food. They're not making all their own products. They're getting some from China, from Vietnam, from the United States, whatever. The people there are using it. We're going to drop down to the United States. Now, we have a pretty big country, but we are using 2.2 United States. So for the people living in the United States, we need the equivalent of 2.2 United States to support our lifestyle. It can't go on. The big problem is right down at the bottom. At our current lifestyle right now, we need 1.6 planet Earths. We don't have an extra planet Earth. At this rate of consumption, we'll run out. It can't continue forever. We've got to get to a sustainable future. Your next key term, just that, a sustainable world. Several topics will come up over and over again in environmental science. This idea of sustainability is one of them. Sustainability, a condition where the needs are met in such a way the population can survive indefinitely. And that's our goal. The goal is for my children and my children's children's children and your children's children's children to have a future. I want them to have a lifestyle as good as, if not better than mine. I don't want to use everything up so they have a horrible world afterwards. Sustainability. This is a key goal of environmental science and something that we will talk about over and over. Now, a sustainable world is not unchanging. Technology changes the game all the time. Through technology, we found a way to grow more food per acre. This is good. This helps stretch it out. We can feed more people on the same amount of land. So our technological advances and our human civilizations have continued to be productive because of technological advances. So it's not fixed. It's not like we find it and it stays there. It's just that our current world today is not sustainable because the developed countries, you and me, are using resources faster than they can be replaced. Now, it's not necessarily coffee. Coffee is something that can be grown and we tend to replace it. But these non-renewables, like maybe oil, gasoline, kerosene, these things that are pumped out of the ground, we're using them up much faster than they can be replaced. Some of our metals, uranium, iron ore, etc. The world's in the business of making more, but we're using it faster than it can be replaced. So this idea of sustainable world, achieving sustainability, this requires everybody's participation. Individuals, citizens, industry, businesses, governments, you name it. We all have to be involved. It's going to be new technology, finding new ways to do things that uses less resources that are not as harmful for the environment. It's going to take sacrifices on your part and my part. Some things are as simple as choosing to buy a LED light bulb instead of an incandescent light bulb. The LED light bulb's more expensive when I first go to buy it, but it can last for like 23, 24 years. In the long run, it's much cheaper and it uses less electricity. So it cuts down on my electric bill, cuts down on everybody's electric bill, giving us more resources. We need to find ways to use less water, shorter showers, something. We need to find ways to cut down on our packaging, the number of trees that we cut down just to make up in paper, or things like you order something from Amazon or Walmart or anybody. I'm not necessarily picking on these places, but it comes in our cardboard box, which is in another cardboard box, which is some other kind of wrapping, and all that winds up just going in the waste. Now, hopefully we're recycling and using some of this better. But we have to come up with new technology. We all have to be willing to make some sacrifices for the better of everybody and come up with new policies, new laws that'll help instill this for everyone. It's time that we all step up and do something for our environment. And it's going to take a little more than maybe just some important people flying out and saying, hey, do something. It's just going to take you and I doing our part bit by bit. That's it for today. Take care, guys, and we'll see you next time.